Today, I'm going to dive into the next chapter in my sermon series called Stories of Courage. So we're going to we've been talking through different stories throughout the Bible that kind of exemplify what courage really means. We think about courage as the guy who has no fear, but I think we've been learning it's about what you do in spite of your fear, more than ignoring it completely. And next week, we're going to be ending this series by talking about how courage perseveres. But today, I'm going to talk about how courage trusts. See, we live in a culture, actually, where distrust is a sign, is a virtue. And trusting too easily is a sign of stupidity. Americans spent over $75 billion last year on cybersecurity. So all that money is spent to keep people out of your accounts because, you just can't trust people to keep out of your stuff. I know this. I have 4 children. So, every day there's a new story of another hack, another scam out there to keep us from throwing around our trust so recklessly. And the people that we do trust keep letting us down. Right? Every day there's another politician, another religious leader who violates our trust because of their own moral, ethical failings. And yet, we have trust implicitly built into every step of our day. When I got in my minivan this morning, I trusted that when I turned the key, it would start. And I trusted that it would get me here safely, even if it was just, even though we were running on fumes in the gas tank. I trusted that we would get here. By the way, we need to take care of that after church. And we have people in our lives that we trust implicitly. That's why marriage is a big deal, because it takes the implicit trust and makes it explicit. And it says in front of all your friends and family, hey, this is a real thing now, and they can hold you to it. And the Bible also calls us to trust again and again and again. The Psalms say, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Whoa. I think my understanding is a pretty big deal, but I'm supposed to trust in the Lord first. And Jesus says, seek first His kingdom, God's kingdom, and God's righteousness, and all the other stuff that'll work out. That takes a ton of trust. But why? Because God really has got to work hard to sell us on this proposition of trusting Him these days. See, there's a place that trust comes from. It isn't just granted by virtue of status. Trust is earned by proven faithfulness over time. And for me, this might be the single most important reason why we have the Bible at all. So that we can see the pattern of God's faithfulness throughout human history and trust the God that we meet there with our lives because of that. And so, today, we are going to look at a story of someone who placed his complete trust in God and see what we can learn from it. All right? And that person is named Elijah. Elijah was a prophet in Israel during some of the darkest days of the Old Testament. See, prophets were God's spokesmen. And there were prophets of other religions, too, that were prophets for other competing gods. And we're going to meet some of them here in just a moment, too. The king, during the time of this story, his name is King Ahab. If that sounds familiar, it's because he's ranked as among the evilest kings in Israel's history. And yes, the Old Testament does keep track of who is most evil. And he's one of them. And he had a wife named Jezebel, too. And if her name sounds familiar, it's because she's awful also. She's also just awful. Just awfully awful. Both of them. Terrible, terrible people. And in charge of Israel. And so they're among the most wicked people in the Old Testament. They are so wicked that God had stricken the entire nation of Israel with a drought that had lasted for years at the time of the telling of this story that we're going to work through today. And Elijah is the only prophet of God who's like actually out walking around doing things. There's like 100 of them left, and they're all hiding in caves because they are so scared of King Ahab and Jezebel. They're scared for their lives. See, Ahab and Jezebel had their own prophets. They had 400 prophets to this god called Baal, and they had 450 prophets for this god called Asherah. And so since they had their own prophets, they didn't want competition in the kingdom. And so they were hunting down the prophets of God. And Elijah, the prophet, is kind of tired of this persecution. You can't blame him. So he issues a challenge to the king. He says, bring all of your prophets of Baal, 400 of them, bring them to this place called Mount Carmel. And it's not Mount Caramel. It's actually Mount Carmel. Bring 2 bulls with you when you get there. And we will kill the bulls there, each as a sacrifice to our own God. Mine to my God, that we're just going to call God, and then yours to your God named Baal. And typically, with an ancient sacrifice like this, you'd slaughter the animal, and then you'd light it on fire so that the gift would rise up in the smoke and go to your deity of choice. All right? And Elijah says, we're not going to light it on fire, though. Instead, we're going to pray, and the God who answers by lighting the offering on fire, that's the real God, and that God wins. And so it's going to be me, little old Elijah, and my God against your 400 prophets and their God. And this seems like a win-win situation for Ahab. He is all in at this moment because what could go wrong? If the god Baal answers, then clearly we're running the show, and we can kill Elijah off, who's running all of the other prophets, and then we don't have to worry about that messy old god anymore. And if by some twist of fate, Elijah's God should answer from heaven with fire and light his offering on fire, we'll kill him anyway. Because we're the ones with all the people and all the power and all the money and all the weapons and all the horses and all the chariots and all the things that make killing easy. So that's the plan. They all meet at Mount Carmel, and the day arrives. And there's not only all the prophets of Baal and all the prophets of Asherah, but there's also crowds of people that have come to see this test of divine power. Whose God is going to come out on top? The prophets of Baal, they made their sacrifice, and then all 400 of them, they all danced around the altar, dancing and singing and screaming from morning until noon. And the whole time, Elijah's just sitting back, kind of tapping his foot and waiting for things to happen. And of course, nothing is happening. Yeah, there's so many questions that come to mind when you talk about a scenario like this. Like, that sounds exhausting. Dancing all morning for fire to come from the sky. Like, did they have like a rotation in place so that guys could take a breather? Were there water breaks? I don't know. Either way, this sounds pretty intense. And around noon, Elijah ups the ante. He starts taunting these poor guys. These 400 poor guys with some insults that cut pretty deep. Elijah says, hey, maybe your God is hard of hearing. Try shouting louder. He says, maybe Baal is busy. Okay, I have to stop here. Because this word busy, we need to take a moment to talk about biblical translations. So, the The problem is most Bibles are written for Christians, like nice, tidy lives that we have. And so they'll whitewash some of the language so it's more palatable to our everyday ears. Elijah is not implying that the prophets are busy with laundry or a conference call with other gods or anything else like that. Elijah is literally asking if the great god Baal can't reply to their prayers, can't respond to their prayers because he's on the toilet. It's that kind of busy. Now, remember, they've been screaming and dancing all morning. And so if Baal's been on the toilet this whole time, he should maybe mix in an apple there or something, I'm thinking. Anyway, Elijah even suggests that maybe their God is sleeping. Now seriously, if you have a God who's still on a nap schedule, maybe it's time to try a big boy deity. That's all I'm saying. Elijah taunts these prophets of Baal to go one step further, and they started cutting themselves, and the Bible says, as was their custom. I'm glad some of these customs are gone. We can pine for the good old days. That's not one of them, where in order to make God happy, you had to scream and cut yourself. Let's avoid that in the future. Okay, these guys are a bad example. So just because it says they were cutting themselves to their God as was their custom, it doesn't mean it's something that we have to do. So there. So we've got 400 prophets of Baal running around, dancing, screaming, cutting themselves in the hopes that their God will start their altar on fire, and nothing happens. After all that, Baal can't produce. And the ironic thing in all of this is that Baal is the god of thunder and lightning. So asking him to start something on fire from heaven should be child's play. Just like, oh, I got a lightning bolt in my pocket here, and mission accomplished. But for some reason, he couldn't come through. And then Elijah steps up and he increases the showmanship that was already in play. He digs a trench all the way around the altar with the carcass of the bull on it. And as the people in his midst dump water all over the sacrifice to the point that it's completely soaked and the trench around the sacrifice is full of water. And here's what happens next. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. Not only did the fire come and consume the offering, but everything around it as well. It burnt up the dirt. I don't even know what that is, right? I don't know what it is to burn up dirt. Dirt just is. But no, it wasn't dirt anymore at the end of this fire. It was gone. It was burnt and gone. So quite simply, God came through. In the wake of this miraculous event then, the drought ended and the people turned their hearts back to God. God proved to Elijah that God was worthy of trust. And we have this story in our Bible today for that very same reason, to prove that our God is a God that we can trust. So, in reflecting back on this exciting adventure, fit for an HBO miniseries, I want to talk through some thoughts about trust. So first, don't trust in substitutes. So imagine you're a skydiver, all right? And you're about to jump out of the plane with the pack that you have packed yourself. Because you always jump with a pack that you've packed yourself. So you know everything is done just right. And someone from the back of the plane says, "Hey, why don't you use mine instead, just for kicks?" Would you still jump? No. You don't know what's inside that pack. You don't substitute something that is surefire and trustworthy when your well-being is on the line. And when it comes to our relationship with the maker of the universe, our well-being is definitely on the line. Our quality of life, as we find out whose words are true and what it means to live a good life, that matters. It matters who we trust in that situation. And it's not a time to settle for any substitute. But of course, we all try it. We all try to replace God with things that we believe are more worthy of our trust because we can see them with our eyes and touch them with our hands. Whether it's putting our trust in one person or one group or one political idea, all of those things will fail us eventually because they are all less than the God who made it all. Whether it's a substance or a someone that we use to help us muddle through life, they will all let us down. So don't trust in substitutes. Stick with the real thing. So, don't trust in substitutes. Another thought about trust. Don't trust in what's popular. Well, you can trust in what's popular if it's popular because it's true. But don't trust in something because it's popular. See, the crowds around Elijah, they knew what would happen. They showed up to see the prophets of Baal win the day. And according to popular opinion, they were Team USA basketball, and poor little Elijah was like Team Luxembourg. They didn't know, but what they didn't know in that moment was that in this contest, Elijah was taking PEDs, pyrotechnic enhancing deities, which is not a banned substance in this event. So, there was a real God at work in the midst of all this, in spite of what popular opinion had to say. And so, you might hear a thought about who you're supposed to be that equals success in this world, or what it means to be happy, and these are the things you need to acquire to achieve happiness. You can listen patiently to those voices, but at the end of the day, the truth comes from the God for whom there is no substitute. So don't trust in what's popular. Don't trust in substitutes. And finally today, don't trust in the powerful. See, here's the problem with those in power. Very rarely do they just stumble into their position of authority. Usually, the people in power are the kinds of people who want a lot of power. Isn't that a groundbreaking philosophy? I know, right? But the kind of person who wants a lot of power, we call those people power hungry. And then we say that's not a good thing, usually, in most contexts, right? We don't want to follow after someone who's always looking to have more influence over the world. And there's a lot of anxiety in our world today around security, around politics, around just figuring out how we can all get along. And it's really important that we don't put all of our trust in any one solution or any one politician. Because if God is really worthy of our trust, then God is worthy of our trust. And you could be the next underdog that God uses to do amazing things. See, that's the story of our Bible. It's not just the story of today with Elijah being the one pitted against the 400. But it's the David and Goliath. It's the Jesus speaking to the powers of Rome. It happens again and again and again throughout our Bible where the underdogs come through and win the day because God is so trustworthy and so true. And that same God who is alive in all those stories is alive in this place and is alive in you. So you really could be the next underdog to come through in the end. Northern Light Church could be the next story that proves God's faithfulness. But it begins with taking the initiative to trust God in your own life. So, what will you do this week to tell God you trust Him? Because we will never really experience God's faithfulness in our lives until we have to trust God completely. And that takes courage. It takes a community, too. A community like Northern Light to support you. And it also takes practice. So you don't think that this moment, this episode in Elijah's life, was the first time he ever trusted God. There were a lot of incremental steps before it got to this massive stage. And so each of us has an incremental step that we can take today to show our trust in God a little more. Whether it's how we use our time, using our time for someone else instead of ourselves, how we use our finances, giving more away and keeping less for ourselves, taking a risk with whatever the next venture is to do the thing that is more good and beautiful and noble than the thing that is more self-serving. I don't know your story well enough to tell you what the thing is. But I can tell you it's worth it. Because God will always come through. Don't wait until you're on a mountain with 400 bleeding pagan prophets to find out that God is worthy of trust. Find one more way to show your trust in the God who is faithful today. Pray with me. God, we thank you for the opportunity to be your children. And just like any good parent, we know that you are there to hear us when we call out for you, and that you never let us down. And though there are moments that are difficult, seasons of life that are challenging, where we feel like we're hanging on by our fingernails, your faithfulness is always trustworthy and true. So help us to move one step closer, to take that single small step of trust in you so that we can see how you come through for us. In Jesus' name, amen.